Take it away.
Thank you very much, Marty. It's a sad day, actually, isn't it? And you blew his brains out. Where does that leave us? Well, I take hope or challenge, actually, from Rabbi Heschel, who very famously said, when injustice, think assassinations take place, few are guilty, but all are responsible. Indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. I want to go back to the early days of the Kennedy administration, the call to many of us of an age to go down there and try to do something for our country. You know, that didn't sound corny then. Didn't sound corny at all. And I was in a little group of, we felt ourselves pretty well chosen. We were going to be the senior officers of the Central Intelligence Agency, right? And so we went into training, April of, what April now? It was around July of 1963. And we learned all the tradecraft, except we analysts who weren't going to be crashing cars or doing flaps and seals. We got to leave early. And just as a kind of a remembrance of how heady and how joyful those times were, I'm going to actually sing for you one stanza of the song that we put on for those operatives who had to stay at the farm, okay, for 10 more weeks to learn how to crash cars and stuff like that. And this is what we said. It was to the tune of Lady Marlene. All you have to know is that Madame Nu was Nguyen Zem's wife, but she was the éminence grise. She was the power behind the throne in Saigon. Here it goes. Goodbye to isolation. We have to leave the farm. We have to save the nation from tragedy and harm. We've all been trained as professional spies to tell foul lies, to chi-coms and ties, and pay Madame No. And pay Madame No. I see some smiles there. Here's the second stanza. Please, dear Mr. John McCone, won't you hear our plea? We've worked our fingers to the bone for very little fee. All we ask is permission from you to sell something to the GRU to help with our salary. And it went on like that. So Sam Adams, after whom the Sam Adams Award for Integrity and Intelligence was one of our classmates, he composed that song, and he also showed that we were losing the war in Vietnam, and LBJ finally had to acknowledge that. Long story short, those were really heady days, you know? Those were days when youth was around in Washington, when it was just possible to have a new start. And that's precisely what I had. And my junior officer trainee colleagues also had a new start. We finished the orientation. I have to mention here that toward the end of our orientation, we were treated to a diatribe by a senior operations officer who threw the book at the sitting president. Said he was a coward. He didn't rise to the occasion for the Bay of Pigs. He ought to be he was so angry. And I remember filing that away in my head. Hello, this is really strange. This guy works for the same president I do. Well, file that away, folks. When I got my new job, wow, it was January of 1964. I had majored in Russian. I could do Russian. I taught Russian. And here I was analyzing relations between Russia and China. Okay. I was in this Soviet bloc area. Okay. Think about that. It was the Soviet bloc. China was under Soviet bloc. Anyhow, we very soon realized what could happen there. The head of this area was a fellow named Fred Janney. He was sort of like two supervisors up. And he was kind of a morose guy. He very seldom, never smiled, except maybe if you tripped over something. And anyhow, he just really sort of curmudgeon, and he'll come into play in just a second. But let me just say that it never really dawned on me that those operatives on the other side of the turnstiles on every floor of headquarters building, those operatives who had their own little cafeteria on the first floor of the building, that they would have been responsible for assassinating a sitting president. Now I'm convinced that they were. The evidence is very, very plentiful and very persuasive. Now, when James Douglas wrote this book, JFK and the Unspeakable, he sent a hard copy around to all his friends in the Catholic Worker Movement, in the Church of the Savior movement. Hard copies, everyone got one. Guess how long it took me to read it? I know. Guess how long it took me to pick it up, okay? It took me like a year before I could read it because I knew what it said. And when I read it, I was appalled because it addresses the unspeakable. Now, that was about 15 years ago. A couple of years later, there was another book, this one, Mary's Mosaic. And this was written by my former boss's son, Peter Janney, who I think may be on this call. Peter called me a couple of years after I had read Jim Douglas's book. I said, let's talk. He said, you know my father? Of course, he's one of my bosses. Well, I'm not gonna spoil your reading this because this is a magnificent book. It's still getting hundreds of reviews, and it reads like a detective novel. It's what Peter Janney, Fred Janney's son, devoted most of his life to, okay? Read it and you'll see that there were people, including his father, Fred Janney, who were involved in covering up the cover-up. Cover-up, of course, was the Warren Commission, let the CIA off scot-free. What happened was a woman named Mary Meyer, who was very, very close to President Kennedy, got disgusted at the Warren Commission report. She knew a whole lot. She was going to divulge it. She had a diary in which she kept all this stuff. She was killed. She was killed, shot on the C&O towpath in Georgetown a year later, a year after John Kennedy was killed. So this shows the people involved, not only Fred Janney, but Jim Angleton and lots of other folks whose names you will recognize that were involved in covering up the cover-up. In other words, if Mary Meyer were allowed to live, this would be very dangerous for the CIA. What I want to do now is something a little different, something more granular. What I'd like to do is show you a slide from a memorandum written in 1967 when another cover-up had to be done lest somebody be convicted for being in a conspiracy, a CIA conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy. Amar, may we have that first slide, please? Okay, now you can see that old ABM script there. It's September 1967. What I would call your attention to is that this is the Garrison group. Who's Garrison? Jim Garrison was prosecuting lots of people, including a fellow named Clay Shaw. You see at the bottom of that first paragraph. Now you have the executive director present, the general counsel. Mark that. The general counsel was there. And you have the worry about what's going to happen before, during, and after the trial of Clay Shaw. Who was Clay Shaw? Clay was involved in the conspiracy in some way to assassinate the president. May we have the next slide, please? Okay, General Counsel, okay. His name is Larry Houston, by the way. He discussed his dealings with justice. Oh, they're going to get justice to help him, of course. And oh, this is the important thing. Now, Ray Rocca was Jim Angleton's deputy, okay? Big counterintelligence guy. After looking at all the facts and knowing about this Clay Shaw, he said, Garrison probably will indeed obtain a conviction of Shaw for conspiring in the assassinate President Kennedy. Whoa, I don't know if it comes through clear, but we're trying to put a little yellow on that because it deserves highlighting, so to speak. So the head of CI says, well, if this goes through, if Garrison succeeds, and he probably will succeed in getting a conviction of all this thing is going to be, all this thing is going to be revealed. So what we have here, well, we have the next meeting of this august group. And if you look at the bottom of that memo, you have Fred Janney's signature. So Fred was the person that Dick Helms, the director, asked to chair this group. All the high muckety-mucks were in that meeting, except the deputy director for intelligence, the one that does the analysis. They were, as usual, excluded. So what's going on here? We have the general counsel. The general counsel is all over this, and we know what Garrison thinks. Garrison would indeed. Rocca thinks Garrison we had a conviction. Whoa. So the implications for the agency are huge. What to do? Well, the next meeting in this group the following week said, well, justice is going to handle this. We don't have to get directly involved. That would be a little unseemly. Justice will tell him to lie. And so this fellow lied and lied and lied very persuasively. The agency said, we'll back you up. Justice said, we'll back you up. And he was, after an hour, the jury acquitted him, okay? What's the backstory or the next story? Dick Helms, former director, admitted under oath in the deposition that sure, this guy, Clay Shaw, yeah, he worked for us for a long time. He was a very highly paid professional. Now, that was 10, 15 years after all this, after Clay Shaw got acquitted. So, lie, and why lie? Well, so that the involvement of the CIA, in this case, in the person of Clay Shaw, would be kept secret. Next slide, please. Now, what about all this assassination? Well, there was a cottage industry of assassins. I mean, Lumumba and Congo leaders and Nos Inziem, and lots of people got assassinated. I mean, there were a whole bunch of mafia and other folks that were ready to do that. And was it okay to do that? Well, how about this specific genre of covert action? Well, one needs to know that the National Security Act of 1947, the one that created the CIA, says zero about covert action. All it says is that the CIA shall perform such other functions and duties related to intelligence affecting the national security as the National Security Council may from time to time direct. Okay, now what is the National Security Council? That's an advisory board to the president. The president is the one who directs. The president is one who gives the orders, okay? Next slide, please. What I want to say, just to finish up on this last point here, is that when you have, if you could, I don't know, Amar, if you can get that last slide back on there. But what you have here is, if you have a president who's able to do this, then you have a president who has his own personal Gestapo. And I use the word advisedly. Presidents can order torture. The torture techniques, the so-called enhanced interrogation techniques ordered by Bush and Cheney, it's a direct translation of verschärfte Vernehmung in the Gestapo handbook, the handbook, okay? I mean, most of them, some of them were more enhanced than the Gestapo did. But, this is really serious. If the director of the Central Intelligence Agency believes that he can perform such other functions whenever the president issues them, when the president says, hey, what, can you blow up the Nord Stream pipeline? Bill Burns, in this case, yes, sir, sure we can. And so they do. Can we do other things? Of course. Let's go to the next slide now, please. Now, watching all this, I have to say from a personal point of view, it's really hard, especially when the analysis part of the agency was corrupted to the point where we falsified information to justify, in quotes, a war on Iraq. Now, you don't have to take my word for that. For this, there was a 5-year investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee, and their conclusions were made available in June 2008. And this is what this bipartisan committee, I mean, the conclusions were bipartisan. Republicans signed on, as well as Democrats and Republicans, in making the case for war. The administration presented intelligence as fact, when in reality, it was unsubstantiated, contradicted, or even non-existent. Now, think about it, folks. What does non-existent intelligence look like? As a result, the American people were led to believe that the threat from Iraq was much greater than actually existed. Now, I adduce this because when this all happened, I was working downtown in a nonprofit, and I just decided to start writing, and we formed this Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and we started writing hurt on all this, but I was really just distraught that my former colleagues participated in this scandal, in this perversion of intelligence that J. Rockefeller thought worth describing as intelligence unsubstantiated, contradicted, or even non-existent. And I said, I really ought to call this for what it is. We ought to get rid of the agency. And I said, well, maybe, get rid of there's a baby here. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I was so happy to be an analyst at the CIA before it became corrupted. I lived with the perpetual hope that it could be back that way again. So I was reluctant to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So next slide, please. I was vindicated. We came through. They got an honest guy in from the State Department to run an estimate on Iran, just as Bush and Cheney wanted to attack Iran on their way out of office. It's very clear, all right? Everybody was saying Iran's going to get a nuclear weapon. They're working on a nuclear weapon. And the NIE of November 2007 said, with high confidence, unanimously, Iran halted its nuclear weaponization work in 2003, and they haven't resumed that work. Now, why do I mention that? Well, I mention that because, McGovern says, there's hope. The analysts can still do honest work. Next slide, please. Now, if I needed further proof, here's Bush acknowledging that this really was a terrible thing because it was eye-popping. These findings, they tied my hands on the military side. Now, he wrote that in his memoir. It's called Decision Points.
they're parts of that thing that he wrote himself. Otherwise, nobody would have let him write these kinds of things. Yeah. After that, NIA, how could I possibly explain using the military to destroy the nuclear facilities of a country that the U.S. intelligence says has no active nuclear weapons program? Bummer, he couldn't do it. What did he do? Bush went to Israel 2 months later and complained about he said the Israelis, I don't agree with what my intelligence analysts said, but they've said it and Congress knows about it, which is really, really awful. Now, in his memoir, he finishes up and he says, some people say that intelligence of this kind was designed to influence policy. Whatever the explanation, the NIA had a big impact on what happened, okay? Not a good one. Now, the function of intelligence is to inform policy. So if you let the president know that Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon, that informs policy. If it influences policy, so the president says, oh, I probably shouldn't attack Iran, well, that's good. But the idea is just to serve up the facts, man, just the facts. And that's what they did. So I was elated. I said, well, maybe it's not irredeemable what has happened to the agency. Maybe we have the next slide, please. If you fast forward to when Trump was elected, and I want to leave adequate time for Q&A, so I'm not going to go on much longer. I just want to point out that when Trump was elected, despite mammoth attempts, subterranean attempts, illegal attempts, all kinds of attempts to make it not possible for him to win. I'm talking 2016, okay? It was judged necessary to make him kind of aware that he should know his place. And so Chuck Schumer called Rachel Maddow and said, Rachel, let me on. I have a statement to make. So on the 2nd of January, 2017, Trump had not even been sworn in yet. Here's Chuck Schumer talking to Rachel Maddow. Watch carefully. It's only a minute, and it's on the final exam.
Ask you, I don't know if you have seen this. I don't want to blindside you with this. This is the latest statement, latest tweet, as you were just saying. The president-elect's latest unsolicited pronouncement on the intelligence community. This was his tweet just a little while ago tonight. You see the scare quotes there. The intelligence briefing on so-called Russian hacking was delayed until Friday. Perhaps more time needed to build a case. Very strange. We're actually told, intelligence sources tell NBC News since this tweet has been posted, that actually this intelligence briefing for the president-elect was always planned for Friday. It hasn't been delayed. But he's taking these shots, this antagonism, this taunting to the intelligence community.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
What do you think the intelligence community would do if they were motivated?
I don't know, but from what I'm told, they are very upset with how he has treated them and talked about them. And we need the intelligence community. We don't know what's going on. Look at the Russian hacking. Without the intelligence community, we wouldn't have discovered it.
I mean, you all know enough about the Russian hacking, right? That the CrowdStrike firm who was deputized to look into the DNC computers about those emails from Hillary Clinton and the DAC, that he swore under oath in December of 2017 that there was no evidence, no technical evidence of any kind that anyone hacked the DNC computers. Not Russia, not anyone. Testimony, December 5th, 2017. Now, Adam Schiff head of the House Intelligence Committee, kept that in his bottom drawer for 2.5 years until somebody told Trump, "Hey, Mr. Trump, you're president. You could probably get that testimony released." He said, "Oh, really? Yeah." So he got a new intelligence director in, and they said the intelligence director said, "Look, Mr. Schiff, either you release that testimony or I'm going to do it tomorrow." Schiff released it, May 7th, 2020. What's now? November 22nd, 2023. Has that testimony or any articles about it appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post? No. So the major media outdid Schiff in keeping this suppressed. So here's, ironically, Schumer saying, "My God, if it weren't for the intelligence people, we would never have known about the Russian hacking." Well, yeah, that's right, because they fabricated that. John Brennan and the rest of them, we can prove that. And I'm no friend of Trump. You don't have to be a friend of Trump, but you don't have to have Trump derangement syndrome so you can't understand what's really going on. Don't get me excited here, okay? Let me just finish here. You know, when you think about how the intelligence community has evolved, let's say evolved, you have Mike Pompeo, right? Now, I was recalling that four of our children went to the University of Virginia, great school, and they have an honor code. No, you can't lie, cheat, or steal, right? And you have to report people if you see that happening, but that's only applies in Albemarle County, Virginia, right? So when I picked them up for Christmas or something, we were driving and we say, leaving Albemarle County. I said, "Okay, kids, now you can lie, cheat, and steal all you want, right? Because you're not." Yeah, so yeah, right, Dad, right. Well, Pompeo, there's an honor code at West Point too. Now, Pompeo is a really good example of somebody who get all A's and flunk life, in my view. There must have been a sign there, leaving the West Point reservation, and so you could lie, cheat, and steal. And he bragged about it. Now, why do I mention that? Because there's a court suit against Pompeo. He violated all manner of things, but it's demonstrably true that he violated the rights of folks who visited Julian Assange because the CIA, through a cutout Spanish security agency, eavesdropped on those visitors to Julian Assange. Now, what will happen? Well, you know, it's problematic whether the judge will finally decide, well, national security, and let Pompeo off. But, you know, our country stands for those Bill of Rights, right? And the Fourth Amendment, you know, I have it here. Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue except upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched or the persons of things to be seized. Now, the evidence is right out there that Pompeo thought that, you know, not only could he do this abroad, where he's entitled to under the charter of the CIA, but he could do that to American citizens who are trying to be legal advisors or otherwise supporters of Julian Assange. That's what we've come to. Pompeo, apparently, when he left the reservation there at West Point, said, "Oh, phew, now I don't have to work for A's anymore, and I can lie, cheat, and steal." And then he bragged about that before some university in Texas A&M, and they all cheered. "Oh yeah, you can lie, cheat, steal." Well, what am I saying here? I'm saying that the agency, as it's currently constituted, is corrupted through and through. It should be abolished. This is a good time to think about that. An agency that can assassinate sitting presidents an agency that can get us into wars that, just by saying yes and by telling the president in this latest case, oh, yeah. Ukraine, oh, don't worry about it. President Biden, we got it. We take care of that. Russia is already losing. And the ineffectuality, the ineffectiveness of the Russian armed forces has been laid bare for the whole world to see. I'm quoting Bill Burns, head of the CIA, whom some of us kind of prayed would be an adult in the room. No, he's not. So what worth is the CIA? We got to get rid of it. How do we do that? We got to figure out somehow to do that. And we have to kind of get together in small groups and not act alone, but do something. You know, what Rabbi Heschel said, injustice takes place, few are guilty, all are responsible. Indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. Now, there's lots more to discuss, a lot more on assassination and the various cover-ups. But I'm going to end now by quoting two of my favorite philosophers. One I had to learn in college, that was Aquinas, and he talked about the virtue of anger, okay? Got that? Anger can be a virtue, just enough of it to do something. He railed against what he called unreasoned patience. He said, unreasoned patience sows the seeds of vice, nourishes negligence, and encourages not only evil people, but good people to do evil. Now, it's been 60 years. Somebody said to me the other day, why do you care? Why should you care? That's the question here. So why should we care? The last philosopher that I would like to cite is Winnie the Pooh, okay? Now, Winnie said, some people care an awful lot. Actually, they seem to care too much. I think that's called love. Thank you very much.